Alright, this is going to be a very basic ASM tutorial. To follow this correctly, you're going to need a couple of programs and files. First program you need is Notepad or WordPad or something that can write text without any formatting is probably best. The second program you'll need is the compiler, which I will have a link to. And if you're curious beforehand and you want to get it on yourself, it is called AKAS, XCOS, or whatever you want to call it, I don't know. Third thing you're going to need is also going to be attached to a link to where you can find it, is the RAM map, which is just a regular text file right here. And the last thing you are going to need is my airtube_documentation ASM, or my regular ASM file, which you can find on Metroid 2002 forums or attached to my video. Okay, let's start nice and simple here and open up our AirTube documentation. Now, this is, remember, for very basic beginning stuff. I'm not going to put it in full screen because for some reason my recorder doesn't record it right. Alright, so let's start at the top. In parentheses is what I wrote as my documentation that you should read. So the first part just lets you know that this is the first part of the code, low ROM. Anything beforehand, anything with a colon in front of it, or semicolon, is comments. They are not included in the program, so as long as they're in a comment, you can write whatever you want and it won't break the actual compiler in its code. But this doesn't have a semicolon in front of it, so it is actually code, and it is low ROM. And all that does is define the type of ROM that we are using, and Super Metroid is a low ROM. And so anytime you're creating a new file or whatnot, you're going to have to put low ROM as your source, so the compiler knows how to compile it correctly into the code. Alright, now we'll go down to the next part. This is where it starts to get a little bit confusing. Defines. In semicolons, this is a comment, and I didn't feel like putting semicolons the whole play area, so this is all one comment. This just lets you know, well, let's go ahead and read it. Okay, defines what you see below. They're variables or values that could be anything, meaning they could be any number. I guess you shouldn't say anything, that's kind of a bad or wrong word to say. It should be, could be any value. It could be any number, and it could also be an address, which we'll go over in a second. And if you look at the first line, which is right here, you should see vertical up with a exclamation point in front of it. That means that, well, first off, the exclamation means that it is going to be a defined or a variable, same thing, and excuse me. So that lets the compiler know I'm creating a new define or new variable. Then the vertical up part of it is what it's named. That could be anything. Vertical up could be, I don't know, value. It could be X. It could be C. I'm not sure about numbers. Normally you can't put them in other programming languages, but or some programming languages, but you might be able to do it here. But for the meat of it here, we're just using words. And the reason you can name it whatever you want is so you know what it's used for later on without having to read what its value is and go back and try to figure all that out. So we now know that this is a variable because of the exclamation, and it's named vertical up. So the next part is the equal sign, which tells it, okay, I'm going to make vertical up, the variable, equal something. And the last part of the line is this number value thing. And it looks pretty confusing because it's a number. You can tell it's obviously 0003, but you have these two symbols here that may throw you for a loop here. And the easiest way to explain it is how I have it written. The $sign is always before any number, but the pound sign only goes before actual numbers, which sounds really confusing. So let's do the examples I listed so you can see how it works out. The first one just shows 0003, nothing in front of it, and that won't work. You try to run it, most likely the compiler is going to give you a problem saying it's not a number. The second example shows just with the pounds or the $sign in front of it. Okay, the game's going to run, it'll work fine, but it's not going to give you the value 3. it's actually going to point vertical up the variable to the address 0003 in the ROM or hex editing. For right now, I believe when you're editing in here, the bank that it's going to look in is 7E. So it's going to look for 7E003. So if you wanted to check that, if you open up that RAM map, which is somewhere, there we go. We'll put that up there. Okay, so we have this here, and then we have our RAM map right here. Now this is all the stuff that's stored in the RAM of the game. So if we look for 7E0003, you notice there isn't anything, so it'll probably give you an error of some sort. But if you say you had it listed to 003C, it's going to give you the value of direct page version of 071F, whatever that is. You go find 071F, it'll give you the direct page version, whatever that is. And then that's what your value is going to be. So you got to be careful about not leaving out this pound sign, because the pound sign in front of it tells the thing that you're using the actual number 0003. It's, in other words, if you have just this in front of it, just the dollar sign, you're pointing to an address. If you have the dollar sign and the pound sign, you're doing an actual number. So, let's check out our different variables we have here. Vertical up is, the variable vertical up is equal to the number 3 because we have our pound sign in front of it. Vertical down is equal to 006. Now all these are in hex, just so you know, because speed equals F000, which is the number, so that one equals F00 and so on. But now, this pretty much just explains what I just told you a second ago, that everything 7E is given. So when you write an address, it's going to look it up in 7E for right here. So if you notice, in vertical distance, I have no pound sign, so this is an address, and it's pointing to 0B2E. So let's find that in here. Scroll down. Right here it is, 0B2E, which is same as vertical speed, pixels over frames unassigned. So that kind of makes sense why it's called vertical distance, because it's going to be her vertical speed. Now, it doesn't push her to a different distance, but it probably should be named vertical speed, but I have just vertical distance for right now. And that's the way it's written throughout the ROM. And then distance low, it says this address, if we looked it up, would move same as vertically by subpixels, and same as high moves her by regular pixels. And they're all pointing to different addresses, 0B5A, 0B5C, and same as pose is 0B5 or 0B36. So now we understand that our variables are all set to something, but right now this doesn't do anything for our code. It's just setting values that aren't being used. So now we got to get in to how we're going to use them.